Hi, Dana. Hi, students. So there's a lot of bad things about teaching online, but it helps us do some things that we would normally not do. And today we have an interview with Dana Dimant, and she's coming to us from Berlin. She's an activist and filmmaker, and she's going to talk with us about disability and the language around disability. How are you, Dana?
I'm fine, and I send everyone in your course hello from Friedrichshain Park in Berlin.
Yeah, nice weather in Berlin. It's not something that
Yeah.
happens every day. So I sent Dana some questions ahead of time. So my first question is, what is your connection with disability and studying disability studies?
First of all, I really want to declare the fact that I am not in the academy. I'm not. I am an activist. I am a field person and a media person. Therefore, I make movies, but I never studied disability studies yet. Although I'm very familiar with the language. Disability studies basically is something that came out of gender studies, a way of perceiving disability in a different way, not as a medical situation, but as a human situation, as a social construct. And I think that what happened to me is two things. First of all, I was born a person with disability. And the second of all, I gave birth to a child with autism. And during the growth of my daughter, I have become an activist because I have always thought, like a lot of Jewish mothers, that my daughter is the best thing on earth and that the world apparently is not ready for her. So ultimately, I thought the problem was with the world. And I was right. Don't edit it, David. I was right. And what I have done as an activist is to try to promote the perception by art and by as a speaker for a movement and as a writer and movie creator, the language that sees people with disability not only as equals, but also, and this is something that's very specific for me, as people coming from another culture, a legitimate culture. And
Almost like immigrants.
a lot like immigrants, and it's a very, very good example because my perception is that disabled people are mostly immigrants in the in society. People always see, even if you see it in the language, people always see their arrival as a surprise, as if it's not normal to be disabled or dependent on other people, like it's a non-normal situation. Although 20% of the population of the world are disabled, these days apparently more. Um, and it's actually a very, very natural form of living. But if you look at social construct, and I have to find another word, and if you look at the way the society is built, even architecturally, you would understand that they're not welcome nor accepted. And here comes the non-accessibility issue, that places are not accessible. Why? Don't you expect people with disability to enter this building? Or the word that they use in Israel, integration, which is actually a word that people use on immigrants. To
Mhm.
integrate someone means that we're the mainstream and we're hosting you. Not inclusion, which meaning a society that should be inclusive for everyone and accessible to everyone. Integration. We didn't, like, you know, my daughter didn't come from out of space. She came, she was from the neighborhood. Why should she be integrated in school or in kindergarten? So
I asked because in the course we talked a lot about immigration, and I think ideas about immigration and integration are relevant to other types of minorities, not just physical immigration. And we talked a lot about the language of immigrants and how they use different languages and how English is not built for them. So I also wanted to ask you about the both directions. First, in what ways do you find, mainstream language, either English, you can give examples from Hebrew, of course, to be what the term that we talked about earlier was ableist, that is, shows this disregard and prejudice towards people who are not considered normal in body or in mind. So where do you see that in the use of language?
Okay, that's actually rather easy because when you come from another culture, and now I want to say that David and I met as both immigrants in Berlin. So what happens when you're an immigrant, even if it's for a short while, people see you as a very not articulate person. They know that you're probably articulate in another language, but they like very fast start talking to you like you're an idiot, or very high, or very slow, and slow at the same time, which can be rather, you want to tell them, listen, I just not from here, I'm not an idiot, I'm very eloquent in my own language. And it's exactly the same as a person with disability. And I want to give an example that I really love because it's a very good example of the disrespect of the mainstream medical society to people with disability, which is actually in Hebrew, siach chirshim. Siach Hirshim means the two, it's like a movie. You can see it like a movie in your head. You see two people talking to each other, but not understanding each other, like trying to stand with their hand, like this. I speak, but I don't speak very clearly, so you don't understand me. And it draws a movie to our head that actually is totally false. Because actually, two deaf people, when they talk to each other, understand each other perfectly using sign language. But we don't respect their language, and therefore we see them as very unarticulate in our language, totally disrespectful for where they come from.
We
And we
don't
make an
understand that.
assumption, and it's such a part of it is such a part of our language to assume things about people with disability and using it in the language. Like, I'll give another example from English, blind spot. Blind spot means the place that you don't see, like your eyes don't see it in the spectrum, or you don't see it when you drive your car, so you miss someone, you don't see them, you're blind to their existence. And you assume by that by not seeing, it's a deficit, it's something wrong. Actually, IRL, people that don't see don't have blind spots. They just use other senses or other accessibility forms so they can see stuff. So actually, blind people don't have blind spots. So it's the use of disability and not understanding the culture and the world of the people with disability creates ableistic stories and ableistic language. And every phrase like this transfers us a story that is actually totally false. We have a movie in our head, which is a lie. And also, it's the same way as we see immigrants. You see an immigrant, you see their culture, you don't know, you're very ignorant of the culture, you don't know what interpretation to give it to the culture. So you can automatically say, oh, they're very primitive, or they don't want to integrate, or without even thinking, is society inclusive to them or not? So, and of course, again, with total disregard of the fact that they are using language, just not yours.
And we use the word like blind spot to talk about understanding, not just when you drive your car. Like if somebody
Yes.
doesn't see, I can't even go beyond the able language. If you don't see something in the discourse, in the language, it's your blind spot. So imagine how can somebody who is actually blind, somebody using the word blind spot in this way, or even use that themselves. So the next question is, how do do you think, or how do you think people with disabilities use language differently? Or I don't mean by definition, but writers that you know, or activists that you know, how do they use language differently than others?
See, this is a very good question, because the thing that happens to us as people with disability and activists is quite complicated because of the fact that we were all grown, or most of us are grown, in a very ableistic world. So a lot like again, women's studies, where you have to understand again, or gender studies, you have to understand again, how do I construct language so it expresses me. We have a problem, because when you do a movie, for example, you have to, when I did my movie, or when other people do movie, you make it to a general audience. So personally, I felt that when I'm making a movie and telling a story which is the same, I have to actually speak in two languages, one for the general audience, and another for people with my disability, which is autism. And the funny thing is that it's first of all, it succeeded, and actually people with autism see the movie totally differently. But the second thing is that it's a challenge that we're dealing with all the time, because we have to decide, do I want to interact with the mainstream culture and its images of disability, the common ones about the poor crippled person, or the inspirational crip, which the public loves so much, because we're artists and writers, and we want to make some money, or we want to get some recognition, so you have to interact all the time with those stories. You can say, I'm beginning a whole new world just for me. So this is a huge thing, because you still want to be included in the discourse and people to understand you. Even people with disability, other people with disability, not necessarily use this conception. We're all raised in a very ballistic society. A lot of us adopt a ballistic views about ourselves, which is very damaging and very sad. So we don't all necessarily use other languages, but I think now things are different, not necessarily because of the disability movement, but a lot of because of the gay movement and the gender movement and the feminism that is very busy in constructing and building new languages. So we're kind of throwing ourselves in the party and saying, okay, we need new languages that express us. But it's a huge, huge work in the process. And it's a lot of work right now, and there is still a lot of work in doing things. And it's also can be very tiresome, because you have to stop and find new solutions, and it's almost like you have to invent the wheel over and over again. The other thing is that there is always a clash with the outside world. I have talked with someone which is a great translator, Israeli translator, which I love and adore, and I think you know very well, and about the Siach Hirshim. And I told her, this sucks, don't use this. And she said, but this is a very common phrase. I don't be over politically correct. And I was like, I'm not politically correct. It's just wrong. It expresses not the idea. I mean, as a translator, you want to transfer an idea successfully, but it actually doesn't mean what you think it means. Actually, I told her there is another story. Deaf people interact with each other perfectly. No, but you know what it means, like in the language. I can't now change the language. I'm like, you're a translator. You are God. You can do everything. And actually, it was not the, so it people a lot of time, when you want to change their perception, say, well, because they think that what the world is already is nature. You know, they think that what already exists, you can't really change language, you can't really change perception so easily. And I'm very careful to talk only to wonderful people. I really want to state, and this really emphasizes for me how difficult it is, because the people I try to make the changes with are not Facebook trolls mostly, but very intelligent people that are in position in society to change those things. And I see them struggle with now I have to, like, the best example is crazy. That's crazy. Like someone like rapes 5-year-olds, he must be mental. Don't say that. Someone murders his wife, you have to be chole nefesh to do that. Stop doing that. I mean, the mental population, which is, by the way, the biggest population of disabled people, is the one that's suffering the most out of the pathologization of disabilities in the language, at least. And because of it, from a very, very huge stigma load. And that is actually very, very sad. And you have to tell people, you know, synonyms? Can you find synonyms for crazy? Or, by the way, I do personally allow people to say to me crazy when I look amazing. Oh God, Dana, you look crazy sick. You know, something like this. Sure, yeah. That's like crazy for a good thing. But to say mental or chole nefesh to a horrible person, can't you find a synonym? You're an intelligent writer. Can you say cruel or an idiot? Or, you know, can you find synonyms? People are so used to using it, they don't do mental work. And this I find totally possible. I think writers today should be more sensitive, or at least play with it, you know, because we can do amazing stuff as readers and as writers. We can play with it. We can show the you know, disillusion. We can break the language to our own needs, to our own. So I think it's totally doable, but it's a lot of work still.
Yeah. So the words like crazy come out of your mouth like that, you don't even notice it.
It's a nice example to go. I did it once actually on Facebook to see reports about horrible deeds done. Unfortunately, in the recent months, it has been so often happened, and uh, to see in talkbacks how many times chole nefesh returns, and how many times the assumption, or even just the use of words. I mean, it's not people that really think this person is mental disabled, but just saying the words, how much it repeats, because people just refuse to say words like inconceivable, or, you know, I can't, you know, they use it as synonym to it's the act it is inconceivable, or he is a horrible person, or they just don't want to use
Especially,
synonyms.
especially if the person committing the crime seems to belong to the mainstream society, right? If it's a white man in America or a Jewish man in Israel who's Ashkenazi, it's very difficult just to say, okay, that's cruelty. You have to put him in another box and put him away. Like, no, he
Like
was.
he's a monster. I think it's two things. First of all, like I'm not a psychologist, but we all know it's, you know, it's a mechanism of detachment. He's not part of us, so we put him outside, which is, by the way, where we put mental people in society. So we put them outside. So this is why we actually say mental, because we'll put him outside of society. He's not one of us. But there is another movie which I think, or a series which I think is very fascinating. I think I'm not sure, I think it's on Netflix. It's a new series about Ted Bundy,
Mhm.
from the perception of his victims, which you rarely see. I mean, people really love seeing documentaries about serial murders. And in this movie, a thing that I thought was very, איך אומרים חתרני? שכחתי.
Subversive.
Subversive is the amount of times people use the word normal.
No,
After you finish seeing it, every time someone says normal next to you, you start to scream, because everyone said, and he looked so normal, but he was like so normal and charismatic, and like, it's because the assumption, because we use the language, we create reality in our head, which of course is not reality. We are creating misconception and actually damaging our own lives, which, because disability words has replaced it, is unmoral. We don't use immoral
mm,
um, We don't use words that has anything to do with morality again. Like, what's really interesting, if you read the Bible, if any of you read the Bible, I really truly recommend. It's a bestseller, and it's one of the texts, to my view, which is actually least disabled, like touched in the ableism, actually, because
Mhm.
you have people with disability in the Bible, but they're actually described as normal human beings.
As you know, uh, my students are teachers or are going to be teachers. So in a few sentences, what would you want teachers to know about disability and how to speak about disability?
If I could ask for one thing, I would say, when you're standing in a classroom, assume that you have people with disability in the class, and then talk under this assumption, because then you'll see that your language and your approach automatically changes. And actually, it is the most moral and right thing to do, because the first act of inclusion is assuming the existence of the people. I actually recommend it in any way. I recommend people to assume that they have gay students. Even if there are five, I want people to assume that they have people with gender difference in the classroom. Don't assume that you don't have students without disability in the classroom, because it's statistically impossible. You are most probably have, even if you don't see anyone with physical disability, either they have a member of their family with apparent disability, or some of them can be autistic, some of them can be with mental difficulties, some of them can be with invisible illnesses and so on, diabetes, whatever. And you are actually creating, or having the potential of creating, their self-perception. And the strongest thing is to assume that they're there. Use synonyms, please. Use right and wrong words instead of using physical conditions, please. And just be good people.
Wow, Dana. So thank you so much for making time for me and my students.